amazing. Can you do that again, please, for me? It's so great. Thank you, thank you. I'm German. Can we all go left? Can we all go right? And left and right? Good, thank you, thank you. That was my order. Very, very good. Thank you. I'm Julia. I'm from Germany. I'm leader of the Pontus Institute, and I have the privilege of speaking at universities across Europe, which, is just a passion of my life. And a few years ago, I was sitting at the shore of this little river, which you see in the background now. Maybe not. Well, I was sitting at the shore of a river with a bunch of students and university evangelists like me from all across Europe. And we were singing Amazing Grace at the shore of that river. Because we were so amazed by the grace of God and how that grace had moved our continent of Europe. Why? Because even though this looks like a very ordinary place and not a very good picture taken anyway, I'm sorry, this is actually the place where the gospel first transformed the heart of the first European. I don't know whether you remember the story in Acts where Paul and Silas are called to Greece. Any Greeks in the room? Yeah, a few. Oh. So they're called to Greece and they go to the city of Philippi. And then on Saturday, on Shabbat, they actually go out to a little river, and that is the river. And at the river, they meet a lady called Lydia from the city of Philippi, and you can see the ruins of it in the background now. And this lady, Lydia, is the first one who opens up her heart to Jesus. She becomes the first Christian in Europe by that little creek. Now, Lydia was an international trade business lady. She was trained in business and economics. Do we have any economics students in the house? Yes, she was one of you, Lydia was. And I imagine how she passed on the good news with the goods she sold. Because that's what people were doing, spreading the light, like you were just spreading the light, just where they were at. And when I was sitting at that little river, I was really struck because it was from that very, very ordinary river that the river of grace actually flooded our whole continent. It flooded into the European universities and the lecture halls and the pubs and the offices and the families. From that very ordinary place, the message of Jesus transformed our whole continent, healthcare and education and politics and economics and social service and our value systems and our relationships and how we think about relationships was forever changed. For millions of Europeans, the liberating and transforming and justice-bringing message of Jesus had truly become good news. So much so that 300 years later, the last pagan emperor of Rome, a guy called Julian, had a problem. He wanted to revive the cult to the pagan gods, but that proved to be quite difficult. So he wrote a letter to complain to a friend, and he says, "Why do we not consider how the Christian kindness to strangers, their concern for the burial of their dead, and the simplicity of their lifestyle have done so much to spread like light, their message? It is shameful that among the Jews there are no beggars, and the Christians support our poor as well as their own." What he is saying is actually that the life and the message of the Christians was so attractive that it was too good to resist. The Christians had actually become the light of Europe, and it had spread and gone on, just as Jesus had prophesied. You are the light of the world, and you, look around you, you are the light of Europe. While I was sitting at that river, my thoughts then traveled to today, 2,000 years later. And I thought about how that perception of Christianity has actually drastically changed especially within our universities. As I said, I travel widely across Europe and speak at different universities, and very often when I talk to students, I realize that for many of them, what is good news for me has actually become bad news. Bad news, particularly in three areas. Firstly, I meet many people who'd say, oh, your good news of Jesus is actually emotionally completely irrelevant. So one student said to me, I've got an amazing girlfriend, I've got great hobbies, I'm good at sports, I will get a good career because I'm studying greatly. I'm fulfilled. I don't need your God, thank you very much, I'm happy. You see, for many people, especially students, I think, the question of the meaning of life has actually been answered. It's to be happy. And in order to be happy, you just have to find the right pathway. You've got to find the right job, the right partner, the right adventure, fitness, mindfulness, whatever will make you happy. Go for it. Happiness is available. You just have to try hard enough and be successful. And sorry, excuse me, I don't need your God for it. Religion actually just restricts and hinders my personal development. Anyone ever heard anything like that? Yeah, some of you have, thank you. So the good news for many people has become emotionally irrelevant. And then secondly, it has become intellectually naive. And that's what John Lennox just talked about. I had a 3-hour conversation at the University of Darmstadt in Germany with the physics students about faith. And when I actually told him that I believed that Jesus had in fact risen from the dead, like resurrection, he looked at me, eyes wide open, and said, oh, until just now, I thought you were actually somehow intelligent. Well, I said, I'm just glad I could maintain that illusion for 3 hours. You see, for many, religion is just wishful thinking, just as John Lennox pointed out, an illusion for those who need a crutch to get through life. Belief in God is naive and subjective, and it can be harmful to science. So it's intellectually really bad news for many people. And then thirdly, the good news has become morally very, very questionable. And that is one of the biggest shifts that I have seen in the recent years. You see, in the past, people would often say to me, I can't become a Christian. You have this high moral set, and I can't make that anyway, so I won't even try. But nowadays, most people that I talk to, especially at university, would say, to become a Christian is actually quite immoral. Christians are homophobic, misogynist, they're judgmental and arrogant, the church abuses children and money and power, and they don't care about climate change. So Christians have bad morals. To sum up, the good news in many universities seem to be emotionally irrelevant, intellectually naive, and morally questionable. Does that resound with you? Have you ever met someone who thinks like that? Yes, some of you have. Thank you. Well, what is important for me to point out firstly is that people who oppose Christianity, they're not bad people. They want the good, most of them anyway, but they don't find it in Christianity. For them, as I said, the good news has actually become bad news, and that's why they say we would all be better off. Society, our university would be better off if the Christian influence would actually decline. And before we quickly object and put our truth down their throats, I think we really, really need to become humble. As John Lennox said, we need to ask the right questions. We need to become good listeners. Just imagine if Christians at your campus, your university campus, would be known to be good listeners. Wouldn't that be amazing? And I think also we need to acknowledge that, yes, quite often, we as a church have not represented Christ very well. And if you're here today as a guest or a participant, and you have experienced that the church or Christians have excluded you from that river of grace and love, if you have been marginalized, can I say I'm deeply, deeply sorry. And I want to apologize today on the behalf of the church. But can I also please invite you to take a fresh look at Jesus himself, because I think he is so worth it and he's so different. Well, I'll go back to the river where I sat and pondered. And I asked myself, why did Lydia, the businesswoman, and the other European politicians and students and professors and doctors and caretakers and craftsmen, why did they spread the light? Why did this river of grace flow across our continent? Why did they think it was worth living out and speaking out about Jesus on their campuses, in their sports club, in the pub, in the office? Well, I think it is because they were convinced that the news of Jesus was actually not only good news, but the best news ever for their friends, for the people they studied with, for the people in their dormitories and the people they worked with, because they had experienced that no message had more transformative power, more inspiring truth, and more breathtaking beauty for the whole of society and for the individuals than the message of Jesus Christ. So I want to take you in the remaining time on a journey, on a little journey, to come and rediscover what that means for us today, what it means that the good news of Jesus got power and truth and beauty. So firstly, let us look at the power of the gospel. Why is Jesus emotionally fulfilling? As I said, society tells us that the ultimate aim of our life is happiness. And a Belgian professor of ethics calls it the imperative of happiness. That means, he says, we are all under the pressure to constantly be happy. One student I talked to at a mission week in the Netherlands said to me, 95% of my time, I put on my happy face, but I just fake. 95%. And she says, it's not only really draining, but it also makes me really, really lonely because there's no one who looks behind the facade. Dean Burnett from the University of Cardiff says we treat happiness as if it was money in a bank account and we just need to know the right PIN or the right code and then we can retrieve it and it's ours. But he says, actually, if we do that, that means the happiness, if we're not happy, we have failed. It means it's our fault when we're not happy. And he calls that a false and unfair burden because he says it's not realistic. There are just circumstances in our lives when we're not happy, and that's okay. The happiness pressure is a huge burden, and it actually makes us unhappy. And then sometimes when we look into Christian circles, I'm afraid, we just take what society tells us and baptize it. And in church, you often hear a version of, yes, happiness is the aim, and you've got to try hard and achieve it, but actually, Jesus is the one way to happiness. So you've got to pray enough and read the Bible enough and believe strongly enough and be loud enough in worship, and God will give you a good and happy life. To be honest, I think that is one of the biggest heresies we have in church today. I think that is the Christian version of the happiness pressure. It pressures people, and it leaves many people disappointed because I have tried the Jesus way, I'm still not blissfully happy, it doesn't work. But you know what? The good news of Jesus is that has got actually so much more revolutionary power. It's much more provocative and so much more liberating than that. The good news is the happiness is actually not the ultimate goal of our life, and Jesus the way to get there. The good news of Jesus is that Jesus himself is the goal, the ultimate goal of our life. A relationship to the creator of this universe who loves you unconditional, no matter the circumstances and how you feel. And yes, happiness can be a byproduct on the way. I am happy when I'm here celebrating with you guys. But to be honest, in my life, and I guess we can all talk about that as well, sometimes following Jesus actually makes our life more difficult. And John Lennox just told us about one incident in his own life. Jesus says, I give you life to the fullness, life in fullness. And the Hebrew word that is used there, fullness, actually refers to the whole of life. The fullness of life. And that includes the dark valleys, and yes, the mountains of joy, but also all the in-between, the grey, the everyday life that you don't put on Instagram. Jesus speaks life and meaning into every moment of your life. And he says, I am with you, no matter the circumstances. And I have plans for your life wherever this life leads you. So that means no moment of your life, even the boring stuff you do at university, sometimes, is not wasted, is not meaningless. Jesus says, I am with you in the boredom of sitting in your library. I am with you in the shameful and painful moments that you wish for no one to see, but I see it, and I love you through it. And in all of this, Jesus says, I am using you for something with eternal value. You're not just like this at your university. I have placed you there to make relationships to people, to get to know me better, to live out for and with me. And I think that can give us a meaning that goes way beyond our personal happiness. Marina, my good friend from Ukraine, who's playing so beautifully here in the band, the violin, yes, please give her a hand. She comes from Kiev, and when the full-scale war in Ukraine started, we talked about, and she said, Yulia, do you think I should leave Ukraine? And if the ultimate aim of her life had been happiness, obviously the answer would have been, yes, please go, immediately. And you can come to my place and stay, and I enjoy your violin playing, by the way. But Marina decided to stay. She decided to stay to encourage the students she works with, to serve refugees, to play the violin for the traumatized. And I asked her, why? Marina, why do you stay? And how do you get the strength to do it? And she says, I know even if I die, I will be with Jesus. I live for him, I die for him, and with him. And that, she says, gives me a meaning and a fulfillment way beyond my personal security and my personal happiness. Isn't that amazing? Jesus speaks meaning into the fullness of your life, and that doesn't depend on how well you perform in your happiness race. He says, I am with you. I celebrate your happiness and your golden moments and your achievements, and I weave golden threads into your everyday life, and I carry you in your difficulties, and I want to use you for something with eternal purpose wherever you are, beyond what you can imagine. Secondly, the truth of the good news. Why is it so intellectually inspiring? I was speaking at a university in the Netherlands in the city called Leiden, and I made friends with a student from Pakistan. His name was Mohammed. And on the last day, we spoke for 7 hours about Jesus. It was one of the most beautiful conversations I've ever had. By the end of the 7 hours, he looked at me and he said, Julia, this is the most beautiful story I have ever heard in my life. Now I only need to find out whether it's true. Well, you see, the good news is that Christianity invites critical thinking and questioning. If Jesus is the truth, he stands up to any test, and we can ask all our questions. We don't have to be afraid of skepticism, but we can celebrate thinking. We can celebrate the academia. In my own journey towards faith, it was one of the most important discoveries for me that, yes, science and faith, critical thinking, and deeply trusting in Jesus go together. And I made a little video for my reasons for believing in this. You will excuse that it was actually made in German, and a friend of mine dubbed it, so it's not synced, but I hope you'll still enjoy it.
Isn't it totally stupid to believe in God? I also no longer believe in Santa Claus. When I began to engage with God, I definitely didn't want to be brainwashed. But then I realized scientific thinking and believing in God do not exclude each other at all. For example, I met John Lennox, who is a mathematics professor at Oxford, and he says that science has not buried or refuted God. The findings of natural sciences point to the existence of God, and science itself is confirmed by the existence of God. Or Professor Dr. Heino Fock, he is an astrophysicist. Recently, a picture of a black hole was taken for the first time. He was jointly responsible for this project, and he is a Christian. There are people who are quite brainy and still believe in God. How do they come to that? There are different arguments. For me, it's a chain of arguments. Together, they lead me to think that it's scientifically much more likely that God exists than that he does not exist. I will show you 4 arguments why I believe that God exists. The first argument comes from physics. Our universe has a beginning. But what was before that? Laws of nature, quantum fluctuations, energy, where do they come from? Why is there something at all and not nothing? Who actually made it bang at the Big Bang? When you watch YouTube videos with these huge domino chains, it's the same thing. One tile moves the next and causes it to fall. But the whole thing only starts when someone from outside nudges the first tile. For me, it is more likely that a totally powerful being, God, has set the universe in motion. Second hint about God. The universe is incredibly complex, much more complex than, for example, a smartphone. The individual components must be, just like with a smartphone, very precisely coordinated. Only then can life emerge. The probability of a smartphone randomly assembling itself and working so that I can use WhatsApp is very, very low. That our universe came into existence by chance is much, much, much more unlikely. To me, it sounds more probable that a totally powerful, intelligent being, God, is behind it. Argument number 3, this time from biology. Where does the information in our body actually come from? Take, for example, our DNA. There is a lot of important information stored there. Each cell of yours is virtually an entire library. If you walk along the beach and suddenly see hello written in the sand, you know from those 5 letters that it's not a coincidence. An intelligent being was here before me and left a greeting. Your DNA has 3.5 billion characters. They fit together and make sense, can even be read. For me, it is more likely that there is a God behind it who wanted exactly you. Fourth argument for all the artists among you, though I am not really one myself. Nevertheless, I think it is good. Why do we actually find beautiful things so beautiful? Why do we love music, for example? Why do we hold our breath when we see a sunset in the desert? Purely from an evolutionary perspective, we cannot explain it. We do not get more food in the desert, for instance. It does not benefit us to find it beautiful. I believe there's a God behind it, who is creative and loves beauty, and puts some of this love into us. Science and faith contradict each other? I think not at all. But hey, continue researching yourself.
Jesus is good news for thinkers and truth searchers. And the beauty of it is, the more you find out about him, the more intriguing and the more interesting he will become. And the beauty is also, Jesus is actually truth in person. So that means he's not a dogma, not a philosophy, not a set of ethics that you can push down someone's throat. But actually the way to come to know him is by entering into a relationship. You can come and find out for yourself and find out, is he trustworthy? Is he truthful? Jesus is the truth in person who, instead of climbing up the ladder of power, as we heard from Luke, kneels down to wash the feet of his friends. And instead of raising an army, Jesus was raised to the cross. The power of his truth is actually revealed in love. It's not truth at the expense of love, but in him, love and truth meet. And then thirdly, the beauty of the good news. Why is Jesus and his message morally good? One student said to me, the biggest shame in my life is that I have never had sex with a man. And I feel that in my society, sexuality is actually what defines status and identity. I said, wow, thank you so much for your honesty with me. But then I also said, I actually don't think that in our society, we appreciate sex too much. I actually think we don't appreciate it enough because it is much more precious than we make it appear. And that is because I think sexuality is ultimately a reflection of the unconditional and self-giving love of God that he offers. And this amazing love is a firm foundation for your identity, no matter what other people think. Again, she looked at me and said, wow, that is the most beautiful thing I have ever heard. In her book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, the secular feminist and author Louise Perry actually comes to a very similar conclusion. She describes how for biological reasons, women actually have less sexual drive than men and have less sexual drive to have different sexual partners and leading a promiscuous life. So she says, from a feminist point of view, the sexual revolution is actually anti-woman because it sets the male needs as a norm and then women have to come to terms with that. And then, very interestingly, the conclusion in her last chapter is that the traditional Judeo-Christian view of marriage is the only Christian ethic that actually accommodates according to the female sexual needs. So men have to come to terms to the female needs. And how therefore, it's quite an interesting read actually, how therefore she thinks that it is good news for women. Now obviously, we've got, again, to be humble. Over centuries, Christianity has been misused to marginalize women. And in the name of Jesus, sexual violence is, up until this day, justified, and the rights of women are oppressed. And I do think the church needs to apologize to those she marginalized and harmed, and to her Lord. Because in the New Testament, we see that the empowerment of women is actually one of the very important marks of Jesus' ministry and the way he encouraged and honored women and invited them to participate, gives them dignity and identity, independently of whether they are married and whether they have children, what status and family they have, and how they're treated and seen by society and others. So I think both society and the church have to learn from Jesus in the way how he saw and dignified the marginalized, how he stood up for the powerless against the powerful, and how he set boundaries against injustice. For a more equal and more just society, we don't need less of Jesus. We actually need more of Jesus. Coming back to the river, the place where the beauty and the power and the truth of the gospel was first talked about in Europe. It started small. It didn't start glamorous, in an ordinary place with ordinary people, like you and me, a woman who'd once been a business student. But you see, from there, the river flooded our continent. The Holy Spirit transformed Europe through that river of grace. And he did so once. I believe he can and will do it again. God has not given up on Europe. The Holy Spirit is still alive and well. He's the youngest and most dynamic amongst all of us. And the message of Jesus is still full of power and beauty and truth. And I would like you to become part of that. I would like to invite you to be part of that river of grace among Europe and among the European universities. So maybe you're here as a student, as a Revive participant. Can I invite you to spread that light as we've just done in the dancing to your university, to your sports club, to your dormitory? Break our hearts for our university. Let that be our prayer. Can I challenge you to go out from here, to live out and speak out the power, the beauty, and the truth of Jesus in your country, on your campus, in your dormitories? Maybe also you're a guest tonight and you say, I would want to come closer to this God. I would want to get a taste of who and how he is. So maybe we can pray for you tonight. Can I suggest that we all now turn into pairs and we pray for one another, pray for each other. Whatever you want to share with the person next to you, pray that God would lead you and that God would show you the beauty, the power, and the truth of his gospel, and that you could be a messenger at your university. After the prayer, 7 leaders will come up to pray over you and to commission you. And but now let's turn into prayers of 2 or 3s. Pray for university, pray for your campus, pray for whatever's on your heart. Thank you so much.